Before I launch in, I'll just say that I'm an academic scholar of Asian medicine, Asian religious traditions, spiritual traditions. I've been a practitioner of those same traditions for the last 30 years, since I was about 20. I spent a lot of time in Buddhist contexts doing Buddhist meditation retreats and so forth. But I've also maintained a daily yoga practice for the last 25 years or so. Read very widely in different Asian spiritual traditions. And then I've had a series of, let's say, profound personal experiences that kind of came from outside of the Asian context, and that has brought me into other spiritual traditions as well. And all of this is blended together in my experience and my understanding of the process of awakening. And it's really the background to what I'm going to talk about today. But my talk really centers on, I think, three principles. And I want to start with those principles just to tell you where I'm coming from, both as a scholar, but also as somebody who's experienced a lot of these altered or extraordinary states of consciousness. So the first principle I want to start off with is a quote that you probably already know by Alfred Korzybski. He, in his book, Science and Sanity, wrote the famous line that the map is not the territory it represents, right? That's true for all maps, particularly true for any maps of spiritual experiences or spiritual development. I think we all know that those experiences are beyond words, they're beyond kind of the ability to capture conceptually. So really any attempt to do so is always going to be a map and not the territory, right? And so the map is always going to be flawed. There's always going to be aspects of the experience that the map just simply can't capture. So building on this insight, or this kind of like basic premise, I want to present the observation that different maps, because none of them are the actual territory, different maps have different advantages and distortions. They provide certain advantages for certain kinds of situations, and they distort reality for other situations. You probably maybe learned this in elementary school or high school, but I remember learning the different projections of the Earth and how they each have their own strengths and distortions, right? So the Mercator projection, which is the one that probably most of us grew up with, these sorts of maps, is pretty accurate for in representing the distances near the equator, but it gets more and more out of whack the further north and south you go. And so by the time you get to Antarctica or Greenland, they're just these massively distorted territories on this map. But if you look at the Gall-Peters projection, it's doing essentially the opposite. It's more accurate in the poles and then distorting the equator. The Werner projection on the other side was an attempt to try to capture three-dimensional globe. These are all attempts to capture a three-dimensional globe in 2D, which is why these maps are not the territory. So the Werner projection is trying to do it in a different way and succeeding in some ways and distorting other things. And so the point is that if you recognize that the map is not the territory, then it's perfectly acceptable, perfectly fine to use different maps for different purposes. And when we draw on these maps, we just recognize that I'm using this map for expedient purposes, for kind of just making sense of this particular project, this particular moment. The map is giving me certain advantages at this point, and it's also providing distortions at this point. So the third principle is that different maps are also going to lead to different experiences for the user, different subjective experiences, different emotional experiences when we use a map. I'll tell you a quick story about visiting art museums with my two kids. We would take them to the art museums, and pretty much all art museums are laid out in a certain pattern with different eras of art in different rooms, and you have a map that kind of leads you through the museum in a certain way. And so now we're in the Renaissance room, and now we're in the modern room, etc. Kids hated it. They thought it was so boring to go around to these different rooms. And I was trying to really introduce them to an art museum, and the map was not helping me to do that. Then we went to the Princeton Art Museum at Princeton University in New Jersey, and they had a scavenger hunt map for kids. And so now instead of walking into the Renaissance room, you walked into the parrot room. Somewhere in this room, there's a parrot. Can you find it? You have to look really closely at all the paintings and really take in all the detail in order to find the parrot. Then you go to the next room, and I don't know, it's a certain hat in a certain color. And the kids loved it. And suddenly they're in the same museum, they're going through the same rooms, looking at the same paintings, but all of a sudden they're loving the experience. And it's a completely different subjective, emotional experience for them because they're using a different map. So those are those are my three takeaways. The map is not the territory. All maps have advantages and distortions. And then maps, whatever map you're using, influences your experience of the territory. If you've watched the other talks, you've heard me say this a million times that the map is not the territory. But I really want to underscore that what I'm doing here, I'm like a mapper, a map maker, a cartographer that is drawing a sketch of this territory. And the sketch is such an oversimplification and it's such a abstract kind of model. It's not the actual territory itself. It's just a kind of a pointer to the general shape of the territory. And studying the map or really geeking out about the map or arguing about the map is useful in the sense that it clarifies the pointer. And so I spend a lot of time on this model and thinking about the words and how exactly I'm going to model this and explain it. But I have no illusions, and you shouldn't either, that what I'm talking about here today is the truth in any kind of way. It's just a very elaborate sort of system for talking about something that is far more complex and actually probably actually impossible to put into words, right? So we're just like playing with the ideas here. And that's really really important to keep in mind. So just keep that in your head as like the mantra for everything that I'm going to say here today. So given that it's a map and not the territory, my argument is that pretty much every map of spirituality that I know of is built a model that carves up the territory into different phases or stages that are numbered, and you move through them sequentially. Some of these are more complicated. They have sub phases. They have sub dimensions of each phase. Some of them are not quite so linear. They can jump around and so forth. But in general, whether you're talking about the ox herding pictures, you're talking about the stages of insight from Theravada Buddhism, you're talking about the Bhumis from other traditions, you're talking about the stages of consciousness from TM or other kind of Hindu systems, you're thinking in terms of discrete phases or stages that unfold in a kind of a particular order. And my model is designed, it still is a trajectory or progression across time. That's true. But it's designed, instead of carving up the progression or the trajectory into these discrete kind of boxes, it's designed to get us to think much more flexibly. And importantly, it's designed to make us be able to appreciate and validate and include radically different kinds of awakenings that are different from person to person, and to put those into conversation with each other in a way that isn't like this kind of awakening is better than that kind of awakening, but that really just highlights and prioritizes the unique individuality of each person's own experience. So we're moving from this kind of one size fits all sequence of boxes into something that is messy, something that is all snarled together in a unique way, that is just you and nobody else has this particular shape to your awakening and the particular ingredients arranged in a particular way. So the central sort of metaphor that I use instead of these boxes or stages or phases is threads. And we're going to weave a complicated and completely unique object. Each one of us are going to weave this unique object in our awakening process. Yeah, the point here isn't to like simplify things or to make things really black and white. Rather, it's to give us a language to talk about all of the complexity of the awakening process, and to be able to do it in like a neutral terminology that then we can use to understand a very wide range of experiences. So that's the motivation, that's the goal, that's the purpose of this map as opposed to other maps. So when we shift into this kind of map, we're going to lose certain features of the other kind of map. We're going to gain advantages that the other map doesn't have. It's not to say this map's better. It's just to say this is a different map that reveals different things. Map is not the territory. It's just a tool. So the premise of the map is that there are threads that run through the awakening process. Not everything that happens in an awakening process is a thread. There's also epiphenomena. There's also just events that aren't linked to any kind of thread. What I call a thread is a sort of a category of experiences that connect together in a trajectory that go from an initial experience to a deepening deeper and deeper into that theme or that type of experience. And I'm going to talk about four threads at the moment. You might notice that my terminology has floated around a little bit, but I've always used like multiple names for each one of the threads. I'm keeping multiple names there just to tie this all together. But the first thread is the emptiness thread, or the deconstruction thread, or the deconstruction of perception thread, the non-dual perception thread, the non-self thread. You can name it a lot of different things. Which name resonates most with you probably has to do with your own awakening experience, and that's great. You can choose whatever name you want for it. But what we're talking about here with this thread is a trajectory towards deeper and deeper experiences of the emptying out of concepts and reified objects, eventually the emptying out of all phenomena. So the collapse of the narrative self, the collapse of gross conceptual objects happens earlier. Then your perception starts to become more granular and have like fluctuations and become more empty and hollow. And then as you move forward, all phenomena start to seem unreal. They start to seem mirage-like. The trajectory moves deeper and deeper. And at the deepest part of the thread, you come to the complete emptiness of all phenomena where there's no objects. And so the guiding question here for this thread, I like to give guiding questions, which are just what's the central kind of dynamic of the thread, or what's the overarching theme of the thread? How do you move deeper and deeper through the thread is in this case by looking at what seems to be real, actual, present, and reified, and then investigate it. Is it really that way? So the narrative self disappears and you're like, oh, I am awareness. Okay, so awareness seems to be real. Is it really that way? And you look at it and awareness dissolves. Phenomena seem to be happening. I seem to be hearing things. I seem to be seeing things. I seem to be experiencing things. Those seem to be actual. Is it that way? Is it really that way? Inquire into it. Even the deepest state of pure consciousness with no objects, consciousness still seems to be real. It still seems to be actual. Is it really that way? Let me investigate it. And you eventually go down to the complete non-existence of every phenomena, every last phenomenon. The second thread, this oneness thread, also known as love or fullness or divinity or the heart thread, different people experience this in different ways. I think the core thing here is a sense of unity, a sense of wholeness, a sense of intimacy. And I feel like this one has a lot of variability with the way people interpret that. Some people talk about God, some people talk about love, some people talk about just the universe or unity with awareness, like universal consciousness kind of thing. Different ways of talking about it. And so here the central question is what still seems to be separate or in opposition to that wholeness. As you move down through this thread, well, you might have an opening experience where you feel a lot of love, overwhelming emotional love for other beings. There's like a you and a them and a love that exudes from you towards them. That's still a separation, right? So then you sink down into that. Is it really that way? Is there really a separation between me and them with love in between us? And then you have like more of a unification of the next level down, right? Where it's, oh, I can see how like all beings are all enfolded into a divine love. There's still a separation there. There's still like me and the divine love. Is it really like that? And you inquire into that, you feel into that, you sink into that. And eventually there's like a dissolution of the individual self into this fullness or this wholeness. The self, the individual is just lost entirely in the unity, right? So complete unity where there's nothing left out of the unity. Everything that could possibly exist is seen as love, universe, awareness, or God, or Brahman, or whatever. Okay, so I'll pause here and say the way I'm talking about these is sequential, and it makes it seem like, you go from like this part of the thread down to the end. Some people do that. They move down the thread sequentially. But a lot of people, they hop around. You go like way down the thread and then back and then down and then back like a yo-yo, or you like 3 steps down, 2 steps back. Different people have different ways of moving through the thread. And this accounts for a lot of people's difference of experience. How they move through the threads is really unique and individual. And that's something we can accommodate with this model that is harder to accommodate with the kind of sequential phases and stages way of modeling. The other thing we can talk about here is that not everybody has every thread as part of their awakening process. And that's totally fine. There are people who awaken just going down only the emptiness thread. There are people who awaken going down two threads or three threads or four threads. And it's not to say that any one of those is necessarily better than the other. It's just, again, like human differences, right? Like some people are born to be swimmers and others are born to be piano players, and we don't know why. It's just the way it is. And the same with awakening. Some people are born to really have maximum kind of oneness, and maybe emptiness is less of a prevalent experience for them. It's a thread, but it's thinner. Somebody else has emptiness as their major thread. Oneness is maybe completely absent. It's also possible that the threads open up at different times. You could spend decades in one thread or two threads, and then another thread comes online all of a sudden. And so it's another way that the flexibility of this model can help us to not necessarily prioritize one kind of awakening as the model for everybody. We can have a loose model that can accommodate lots of different types of awakenings. We can also accommodate different kinds of traditions. You probably can already see like certain traditions really emphasize the emptiness thread. Advaita, Theravada Buddhism, Zen, they're all about emptiness. And then there's other traditions that really maximize the oneness thread. Anything coming out of Christianity or Judeo-Christian tradition or Muslim Sufism, etc., goddess traditions, they're all about the oneness, right? And so these different traditions have different orientations, different things that they prioritize, and different resources for us. So just to go through the last two threads, we have the energy thread, also referred to as Kundalini, subtle body, astral body. You can add all kinds of other words in here too. And here, what we're talking about is a trajectory in the awakening experience towards more and more of the universe being characterized as dynamic and energetic and full of potential, as opposed to being solid and static. And so this trajectory starts with perhaps you have a certain experience of energy in your body, like you feel chi or prana or kundalini or something like that. But it's like your body is a structure and the energy is inside your body, right? And then you go from that to seeing the structure of the body falls away because that becomes energy too. And then perception becomes energetic. All phenomena become energetic. And pretty soon, like you work down the thread and it's like the whole universe is just buzzing with energy. And this thread ends with seeing that the energy never actually materializes. It's always only in potential and it never actually manifests. So the manifest world never actually manifests is the end of the energy thread. And finally, another kind of experience, the psyche or the unconscious or shadow materials or conditioning. I talk about it differently than other people, I think. So for me, the psyche thread is not something that needs to be dealt with at a certain point in your awakening process so that you can get back to your awakening process. It's actually a thread that's woven through the whole process. And so when I talk about the unconscious material, I'm talking about biographical material and the way that structures your awareness, your consciousness. But beyond just your own biographical information, I'm talking about ancestral information. I'm talking about intergenerational. I'm talking about genetic. I'm talking about social conditioning, cultural conditioning. I'm talking about your conditioning as a mammal, as a human being. You see the universe, you see phenomena in a particular way because of your biography, because of your parents, because of your heritage, because of your gender, because of your social context, because you speak the language you speak. You see the world in certain ways because you're a human, because you have human eyes, and they're different than the way you would see the world if you were a lobster or a snail, right? So the way you perceive everything, the way that your impulses, your instincts operate, just like every last bit of perception is a product of your unconscious layers of your psyche, right? And that dictates certain kinds of behaviors and certain kinds of ways of experiencing. So the trajectory ends with just realizing like every last tiny little bit of my experience is conditioned, every last bit of it, and there's nothing that's not conditioned. So the trajectory, you move down the trajectory by asking this question, like what is still unresolved or unwelcomed or unliberated, or what seems to still be like sitting outside of the understanding that this is a projection. So if there's anything in your experience that you think of as not being a projection of your mind, then the point is to welcome that
allow that to be liberated, allow that to be resolved. The threads model basically presents a process of like spiritual maturation. So, for whatever reason, some people are prone to having an opening experience of one or more of these threads. It could be that you sought this out through kind of some kind of spiritual practice. It could be it just spontaneously happened to you. It could be like, who knows what reason. One of these threads opens up. Maybe multiple threads open up. Maybe they open up at different times. Maybe they open up simultaneously. But each thread has a trajectory of maturation. Lots of people just have one spiritual experience and never have it again. So I wouldn't call it a thread. Or you're having an awakening experience and there's something that happens like one time you had a huge Kundalini thing, but then never again. I wouldn't necessarily call that a thread either. Even if it was like amazing and huge and incredible and really important to you, if it didn't mature, if it didn't have a trajectory of maturing, then it's not a thread in my model. It could be that it was the opening of a thread and it'll mature later. That could be the case. But in order to recognize it as a thread, it has to be this trajectory. So it opens and then it starts to deepen. You go deeper into the thread, right? You might bounce around like I was talking about before, but in general, long term, the trajectory is deeper and deeper down into those threads towards the endpoints that I talked about in the previous slide. I talk about a process that I call braiding, where at a certain point you have multiple threads, if you have more than one thread open, where there seems to be this kind of like oscillation between them, or like an interweaving between them, a braiding between them. So if you have your oneness thread is open, your emptiness thread is open, your energy thread is open, it could be that like you experience experiences of oneness and experiences of emptiness, and then you have experiences of energy, right? Or and then you have experiences of psyche, and then maybe back to emptiness or back to energy or whatever. And there's like an oscillation between these different kinds of experiences. A lot of people feel disoriented by this. If you're prone to really strong experiences, it can be disorienting to have these kind of flip-flopping, like whiplash from going back and forth between all these experiences. People who have a little bit more of a gentle ride and don't have such big, flamboyant kind of mystical experiences, they can feel less whiplash from this. But most people, not everybody, but most people has this kind of braiding process where these threads are coming online and they're deepening, but there's like they feel unintegrated. So you're like, your non-duality is here and then your heart is over here, right? And the two don't seem to sync up and they seem to be paradoxical and they don't seem to mix with each other. But then as you get down towards the bottom, it's like the threads start coming together and start being more and more integrated. They start becoming more and more unified together. And so the experience stops being so much of oscillation, blends more. And then that brings us to the end of the model where we are going to release the threads.
The idea is that those threads, to use this metaphor, of course, it's not the territory, it's just a map, but to use this metaphor, let's say that everybody goes through the same length of thread in the long run, right? Everybody's going to go all the way down to the end of each of the threads, right? But how they're going to experience that journey going down to the end of that thread is going to be different depending on how many threads they're going down simultaneously and how many loops together they've got. Whereas some people will be traveling down three threads and experience an intertwining of those threads and come out and say, oh, I experienced 19 locations. Other people might go down two threads, weave those together and say, for me, I actually experienced six kind of major shifts in my trajectory. Some people might have these really long periods of time where they're in one, and then really long periods of time where they're in another, and come out and say that they had two major shifts in theirs. I can imagine somebody just has one big awakening experience, boom, right into the emptiness thread and just follow that to the end. And they just say it's all emptiness. It was just all one thing or one process. So the idea for this model, just thinking in terms of like the metaphor of this model, is that the same amount of dissolution of emptiness, the same trajectory, the same length of that thread, we get to wherever we are and we look back and we identify the stages that we've gone through differently depending on how the threads have been interwoven. So let me pause and look and see what I might need to read there and respond to real quick. So just give me 1 second. And I love how earlier in the chat, somebody was like, oh, for me, it was emptiness first and then love. And the next person was like, oh, for me, it was the opposite. That's right. That's what I'm talking about. Every person goes through these weaving of these threads in different ways, right? At different like speeds, at different levels of intensity, in different like movements forward and back along the threads. So for me, the idea of discrete stages, locations, or boomies, that this is the prescribed way that everybody goes through it. For me, that map is limiting. And this map provides more flexibility in terms of how certain experiences unfold over time.
I'm going to talk mostly about these last two stages or processes. So we're going to start with integrating the threads. So here I want to introduce also a concept of a fifth thread, which is something that I found useful, a useful way of talking about the integration of spirituality with daily life, ordinary stuff like paying the bills, taking care of the kids, taking care of the dogs, planning the family vacation, going to work, stuff like that. I think it's helpful to think of that as a thread too. You can think of that as a thread that has always been there from the beginning for you. And maybe some people have had some of these threads, other threads open since the beginning, since birth or whatever. But the daily life thread, we've all had that since the beginning. And during the braiding process, that oscillation can sometimes like obscure daily life. And you have some big emptiness experience, and all of a sudden it's, I can't go to work. Like I can't function. I can't do normal things like paying the bills or making appointments because I'm too absorbed in the emptiness. So the daily life thread is obscured by the emptiness thread. So that's in a relatively like unintegrated part of the process. But once you start integrating the threads integrate with each other and also with the daily life thread. So now it's like you go to work and work becomes like the environment in which you can really live out your compassion, let's say, or you feel completely empty, but you're also able to interact with your kids in absolutely normal ways. So the threads are blending in that way. And then the threads are also blending more spiritual threads, the other four, they're blending with each other in a way so that it's no longer, oh, I have energy over here and heart over there, or I have emptiness over here and the psyche over there, but you start to experience them as blended together. This is gonna like culminate. This kind of general direction of this process is away from that oscillation where one thing is seen at a time to just like simultaneity, like things are there at the same time. More and more is happening at the same time. More and more can be seen to be part of the same whole. And so it comes in any order. You can experience the blending happening. If we've got five threads now, we got the four spiritual ones in the daily life. You can be blending these two or these three or these two, right? It doesn't really matter the order in which it happens. It'll feel really significant for you, but it doesn't ultimately matter which threads are blending in what way because they're going to culminate in the integration of all of them, the total integration of all of them, so that all of the threads you have open are going to unify together and unify with the daily life and become like part of the same thing. I've found in talking with people that it's usually during this integrating process that you also are propelled into the real depths of the threads, so that the threads, for many people, you don't actually experience the end point of the thread until this integration process where they start to blend together. So again, the point isn't that there are distinct phases or stages here. It's not like you have to open first, do all the opening first, and then you do all the deepening, and then you do all the braiding, and then you do all the integrating. That's not what I'm talking about. It can be a thread opens, it deepens, then another thread opens, and it goes really quickly to deepening, and now you're braiding between the two of them, and now another thread opens, and now thread three and thread one are starting to blend, but thread two is oscillating, it's coming on top and obscuring that blend. And then suddenly there's thread four, right? And that joins up with daily life, but they're still not integrated with these other two, right? It's just, it can be a mess, and everybody's mess is going to look differently. The point is that the opening, the deepening, the braiding, and the integrating process are all happening on their own speed and moving towards a trajectory of deeper and more unified or blended. This kind of chaos can be rather tumultuous and rather difficult. If it's happening very slowly for you, if you're one of the people that wakes up over decades, you might not even notice. Somebody might point something out to you and you're like, oh yeah, I wonder where that went. 10 years ago, I used to feel that way, but now I can't find it or something like that. You didn't even notice something dropping away. But some people wake up really quickly and have this whole process go down in a couple of years. And it can feel really tumultuous and very disorienting. Like I said earlier, whiplash. Eventually, there are a couple what I call existential fear gates that come up at some point for most people. Pretty much everybody that I've talked to, it hits a point at some point where It's like the deepest point of the threads. And usually when they're very integrated and you're at the deep end of this integration and deepening process, that there's some kind of really core grips that your system is holding on to that it doesn't want to let go of. And when that point comes, a lot of people have tremendous difficulty with letting go of these safety mechanisms that they're used to and allowing this process to complete. A lot of people run into real existential fear at that point. So I just want to like flag all that and say that's something we can talk about in the Q&A if that's interesting to talk about. But I'm going to move past that now and just talk about the culmination of the integration process, where eventually all five of the threads that we've been talking about are all going to become like completely integrated together. You've gotten to the depths of each one of the threads and they're very integrated together. A lot of people describe this as feeling like completely enlightened, feeling like the whole spiritual process is finished and this is like I've arrived at the place that was described in the scriptures or in the traditions, whatever, as like the highest attainment within this or that model. You can see in this stage, you can see the full ramifications, right, of each one of the threads. Reality appears as this multi-dimensional with multidimensionality. So you can see reality through the lens of the threads, but you can also see them all simultaneously, all the threads, all at the same time. So you can at will shift your perspective on reality, seeing different facets of the whole, but you also see it totally integrated together. The way that might sound when people talk might sound like all of reality is totally empty, totally saturated with divinity, totally divine. It's all just potential energy. It's all manifestation of my mind or my psyche. And it's all completely normal and completely ordinary all at the same time. Right. So it's like you can hear like the language and the models of all of the threads simultaneously in the way somebody's describing that. Okay. So I'm going to take a sip of my drink. So now I want to move to the releasing process. And the releasing process doesn't have to wait for that fully integrated enlightenment kind of experience. You can start releasing threads whenever they're ready. So again, it's not like discrete phases, discrete stages. We're talking about these boundaries are not fixed at all, but it does seem that you do have to get to the deepest endpoint of a thread in order to release it. And you have to have gone all the way through the thread in order to have the release happen. So after the deepest endpoint of that thread is reached, there's this kind of releasing that takes place. So again, it's different for each one of the threads. I'll start with the emptiness thread. And here it can be rather rapid. Like you can release like 90%, 99% even of the thread, perhaps even 100% of the thread very quickly. But I think it's better to think of it as potentially being a gradual process, a gradual disappearance. And then the other part is that some people will describe it as the loss of the ability to do the thread, and some people will talk about it as the loss of the desire to do the thread. So like for some people, it's like they are releasing the thread, and for other people, it's like the thread is releasing them. That's different from person to person. But what we're talking about is the disappearance of either the ability or the desire, the disappearance of the ability or the desire to monitor experience as a subject of any kind. So in the case of emptiness, you've gone through the emptiness process, emptying out more and more of reality until you come to the deepest part of it, where it's like you've completely emptied out all phenomena. And now you just release the ability or desire to notice if phenomena are empty or not. You release the desire to notice, are phenomena arising in the first place? Am I experiencing something in the first place? That question disappears and is released. I struggled with how to like talk about this. The metaphor that I came up with is you go on autopilot. Your body is driving your life without a monitor or a sort of an awareness, a subjectivity, a consciousness of any kind being there to monitor what's happening. So it's just everything goes on this sort of autopilot. Let me go through the rest of the threads and I can come back and say a few things more that might be more helpful. So the oneness and the energy threads, these two threads, I just put them in the same bullet because it's the same thing for both of them. So You get to the bottom of the oneness thread, bottom of the energy thread, and then these threads disappear. The ability or the desire to experience any states related to oneness or energy just disappear, or you let go of them. You set them down. And it's hard to talk about these things. It's hard to explain these things. But if you think about it, any kind of experience needs some kind of separation as a subject in order to have the experience. For example, with oneness, if you're feeling oneness, if you're experiencing a unity with all things, there's an experiencer that's experiencing the unity with all things. So if the experience is arising at all, then there's something that's separate still. Because once the thing is completely unified, there's no more experience of unity. I was thinking this morning as I was taking a shower of a metaphor, and I thought one way of talking about this is I don't go around feeling like my right arm is unified with the rest of my body. I don't go around like marveling, wow, my arm feels so integrated into the rest of my body. I don't have that thought ever. I don't have that sensation ever. I don't have that feeling ever. My arm just is part of my body. The thought that it would be otherwise or the need to marvel at the unification of my arm with my body just doesn't come up. And I think it's a similar thing here. Now, if I had an arm amputated and had a robotic arm placed, then I might have a different relationship with my arm, right? But in my case, my arm it's just part of my body, and I never need to notice that it's part of my body. I never need to feel unified with my arm. And so we can say there's like a similar process happening here where unity consciousness, if you're having this consciousness that everything is unified, right? There's something that's not unified that's seeing the unity and the true integration, the total final integration, the sense of unity would just fall away. There wouldn't be any noticing of the unity. You could say the exact same thing about energy, right? If the whole universe is buzzing with energy, there's a stable observer that's noticing that everything else is buzzing. If the observer was also buzzing, you wouldn't be able to notice that there's only potential energy and that nothing ever manifests. If you're noticing that nothing ever manifests, then there must be something stable that's doing the noticing. So these are very maybe complicated, mind-bending things that I'm saying if you're not in the neighborhood of having these kinds of experiences. But the actual experience of these threads falling away doesn't have to be as conceptual as the way I'm explaining it right now. A lot of people just describe, I just stopped having any kind of spiritual experiences. They just stopped happening. I don't know why. So a lot of people just will describe the releasing of the threads. It's just the threads stopped, they just stopped. Like I used to do meditation and have all of these really deep meditation experiences. And now I just sit there and it's just like nothing happens. So a lot of people just talk about it in those terms. I'm more kind of like scholarly, analytical in the way that I'm thinking about them and talking about them. When we talk about the end of the psyche thread, the releasing of the psyche thread involves the disappearance of the ability or the desire that previously was so important and central to this thread. We talked about needing to welcome and allow unconscious conditioning, like understanding unconscious conditioning, allowing it to be liberated, allowing it to be recognized and seen. And what's happening with the release of the psyche thread is just the ability to relate to unconscious conditioning disappears or fades away, or you no longer feel like doing it. Again, if you think about it, this is the result of the maximum integration, because if there's a part of you that's relating to the unconscious mind, then there's a separation, that there's a part of you that appears to be separate from the unconscious mind. If you integrate that last piece into the psyche thread and see it as being conditioned, then there's nothing that's not conditioned. Then there's nothing that can stand outside of conditioning and observe that you are conditioned and relate to the conditioning in any way. So the whole sort of psyche, the whole unconscious thread basically it operates autonomously with no part of you standing aside relating to the conditioning. It's every last piece of you is conditioned. Every last reaction, every last word, every last perception is just operating autonomously without any kind of like relating to it or having an opinion about it or having a stance on it or having an emotion or a feeling about it. And then like the same kind of maximal integration, when everything is finally integrated, any differentiation falls away. You could say the same thing about daily life. There always has been some kind of separation, some kind of subject that has an idea or an ideal or a notion or a mission or a plan, some kind of perspective about the trajectory of daily life, right? The trajectory of that thread. There's something standing outside of daily life wanting to orchestrate it in some way, wanting to have opinions about it in some way, wanting to transform or affect it or drive it or direct it in some way. And now with the integration of that last piece that was holding back into the whole, there's now nothing standing outside of daily life in order to have those kinds of opinions or those kinds of desires anymore. To summarize all of this, we're talking about releasing the threads. We're talking about the disappearance of any last trace of awakening or enlightenment, any kind of relationship with states of consciousness, any kind of meaningfulness to these threads, all of it is dropped. And there's just like return to a completely mundane and normal existence. I think the last ox herding picture, the return to the marketplace, is a nice metaphor for this. After all the bells and whistles of the whole spiritual path are gone, you just go back to work. As you're letting go or releasing these threads, or they're releasing you, these other things disappear along with the ability to experience them. So you have the releasing of all ontologies or worldviews about them. And so this is something that's, some people might have released these ontologies and worldviews earlier, but if you're still holding ontologies or worldviews about these threads, this is when they disappear. So an ontology or a worldview is like an idea about what's real, an idea about reality. So, emptiness thread ontology could be nothing exists. Everything is illusory. Everything is a mirage. Those are ontologies. And those are let go when you release the emptiness thread. The ontologies of the emptiness thread are let go. Ontologies of the oneness thread are like everything is all part of the same thing, or everything is actually God, or everything is actually blah, blah, blah. That's an ontology that's released. Everything is energy. Everything is this, that, or the other. Those ontologies are all released. Now you're going to say, but Pierce, you just went through 5 slides where you were saying exactly those kinds of things, right? This is a model, not the territory, right? So the territory involves the release of all models, including this one that I'm giving you right now, right? All ontologies and worldviews fall away. Along with that are the release of all the identifications. So again, this might have fallen away earlier for some people, but a lot of people hold their identifications with their ontologies all the way to the very end. And so even in this totally enlightened, totally integrated stage, you can say, I am emptiness. I am God. I am Brahman. I am awareness. I am potential energy. I am the goddess. I am the unconscious. Like all of those identifications, I am that, are released as you release the thread. When you no longer have access to emptiness, you no longer have access to the experiences, you no longer have an ontology about emptiness, it just does not make any sense at all to say, I am emptiness. And you just let go of that identification as well, or the identification lets go of you. Along with the ontologies and the identifications comes the release of the ability to fixate or to stabilize or to control. You could add other words here: to sink into, to develop, to find even any of these threads. So previously you might have been able to like have a stable sinking in experience of oneness, let's say. Even at the depths of the thread, you could dissolve into total oneness and hold that state. The ability to hold a state or fixate a state or stabilize a state of any kind just disappears. When the thread is released, the ability to fixate or stabilize that thread goes along with it. So I've been talking so far about all the things that disappear when you release the thread. And I said sometimes it can seem like the whole thread just is gone, or like 99% of it is gone overnight. It can happen very quickly. The whole thread just disappears. But I've noticed that even if you think the thread is totally dropped, it can turn out that there's like a little snag or a little snarl or a little tangle of that thread that you discover even quite a bit later. So I myself thought I had dropped the oneness thread for a year, and then I had a kind of a sort of a snag or a snarl with the oneness thing. Not that snag or snarl makes it sound like it was a bad experience. It was actually like a lovely experience, but it was like a resurgence of the oneness thread, or like kind of a catching up of the oneness thread again, even after having dropped it for a year and it re-emerged. So ever since that, I've been saying that it's probably best to think of these as gradual release over time, and that these occasional snarls or snags or tangles can happen along the way. And so not to assume that the thread has been totally dropped. It's just a process that'll play out over time. So eventually, though, if you follow this trajectory, you've released all of the threads, you've released the ontologies around them, you've released the identifications, you've released the ability to sink into them or fixate on them in any way. Eventually, you're gonna arrive at a place where just spirituality itself no longer makes sense. And so I have a quote from a thing that I wrote recently, and it just says that at some point it dawns on you that spirituality is finished. And it's not finished because like you arrived at a destination. Previously, when you were in that enlightened integration state, you thought you had arrived at the destination, but then all of that falls away and all of that's dropped. And suddenly you're just like, oh, it's not because I found any destination, but it's just because every last aspect of spirituality has really ceased to be relevant in any way. I'm not having the experiences, I'm not having the ontologies, I'm not having the identifications, I can't sink into it. There's just no point anymore to spirituality. So the whole idea of spiritual practice, the idea of engaging in spirituality in any way, the meaningfulness of spirituality altogether just dissolves, like falls out from under you, or you let go of it. And so you might call that sort of arriving at a state of post spirituality where just spirituality is irrelevant. Okay, let me give you a couple of clarifications before we go to the discussion. Just to be sure we're all on the same page, I want to just really underscore in case like I might have misstated something or spoken about something too quickly, or you might have misheard it, or we might have had a miscommunication. I just want to make absolutely certain that I'm clarifying what I'm not talking about here. So the first thing that I'm not talking about is any kind of exalted or special kind of consciousness or awareness or state of any kind. So I'm not talking like this kind of release of the threads is not about any kind of exalted or special state of mind or perspective. It's the dropping of all of that stuff. It's the dropping of all special, exalted forms of consciousness or states of consciousness. It's completely normal, completely just mundane and ordinary. I'm also not talking about any kind of perfection or purity. And I really dislike this language. I come from a Buddhist background mostly. That was mostly the tradition that I engaged with the most. And then there's a lot of talk about perfection and purity. And there's the image of like the Buddha, and everybody wants to be like the Buddha, and they're going to become totally like perfect like the Buddha. And like when they describe the Buddha, it's like all these great attributes and not a single negative one, right? Not a single thing that is possibly could be wrong with him. And that's not what I'm talking about here either. This state of dropping the threads in no way implies any kind of perfection whatsoever. In fact, what I described there was you drop the threads and basically you go on autopilot and you just act out your conditioning without any means of observing, monitoring, or separating from your conditioning, right? So if that's what you're doing, is going onto autopilot and just acting out your conditioning, any kind of perfection is moot. Basically, you're just gonna act out whatever your conditioning is. And now you're not gonna have this ideal of, oh, I want to act in an enlightened way, right? Or I want to like open my heart and be kind to this person I'm talking to. You can't do that anymore. So essentially you're just gonna blurt out whatever you're gonna blurt out. And you're just gonna say and act and behave however you're gonna act and behave, however your conditioning has you act and behave, right? You become totally authentically your flawed conditioned self, right? Your flawed conditioned being just operates autonomously without any kind of guardrails. So the idea that's like we're going to arrive at some perfected, purified state by just letting the conditioning just run free, I think it's just a myth, just a mythology, in my opinion. So I'm also not talking about loss of functionality of any kind. Sometimes people hear just that daily life just unfolds however it unfolds, and the idea of the autopilot not having a sort of any kind of like meaningful monitoring process over your life does not equal a loss of functionality. You can schedule your calendar, you can plan your family vacation, you can go to work. In fact, with the kind of stripping away of, or the falling away of all of this spiritual stuff and in this more like post-spiritual state, you have a ton of bandwidth that you were previously allocating to doing spiritual stuff, right? Because you're no longer spending a lot of time like thinking about spirituality or thinking about cultivation of any kind. And all of that energy, all of that sort of bandwidth can be reallocated just to ordinary life. And so you can actually find yourself becoming extremely productive and extremely efficient in daily life. And so, on the contrary to a loss of functionality, there, I would say in the long run, it's probably like a dramatically increased efficiency and bandwidth for handling normal human daily life experiences. So I'm also not talking about any kind of static endpoint in terms of change and growth. So this is like a frequent misunderstanding or a frequent question that I get back about when I present the model in this way is, so I said go on to autopilot with conditioning just like showing up without any guardrails. But that doesn't mean that you're never going to change or grow in any way, because this autopilot, you could say, has built into it a kind of like responsiveness to the environment. And you guys know this. You did not need to be taught not to touch this thing. If the first time you touched it, you got an electric shock, right? So you go and you touch some new object that you've never seen before and you get a strong electric shock. You don't need to be taught. You don't need to think to yourself, I will endeavor to never touch objects like that ever again. You don't need an egoic structure. You don't need a reflective structure. You don't need an ontology. You don't need a worldview. You don't need an identity for your body to never touch that thing again. There's a reflex built into the human body, built into the human system to learn from mistakes and to modify behavior. And so this kind of like dropping of the threads in no way prevents you from being able to respond in a very instinctual and very like fluid way to negative events or negative stimuli. You said a bunch of things that fell the wrong way and people are mad at you for saying those things. Your autopilot will say, oh, we should learn not to talk this way. We should modulate our language and so on and so forth. And you can continue to learn and continue to grow in that way. It just doesn't need this kind of self monitoring structure. It doesn't need the ontologies. It doesn't need the identities around that kind of adjustment. The adjustment can just happen without that whole apparatus that previously was there. Okay, and finally, what am I not talking about? I just want to come back to my initial slide. What am I not talking about when I talk about releasing the threads is I am not talking about a stage or a phase that you should compare yourself against. So again, the map is not the territory, right? The territory is unspeakable. The territory is, you can't put it into language and concepts. If what you're hearing when I'm describing this is, oh, there's a stage or a phase that I need to attain or that I'm not experiencing or whatever, you have already created a worldview, you've created an ontology, you've created an identity, you've created all of these kinds of things that I'm talking about dropping. You've created them around this model, and that's not the point of this model. So please do not take this model as a stage or a phase to compare yourself against. I want to just finish with I think, some decent advice. If this model is at all helpful or useful, it might be helpful or useful in terms of facilitating communication between people so that we can move out of this sort of like, you're in level 7 and I'm in level 6, like way of thinking. We can bring more validation, more awareness, more acceptance to dramatically different kinds of awakening. Oh, why is their awakening so different than mine? It's not because there's something wrong with me. It's not because there's something wrong with them. It's because they're having a 1-thread awakening. I'm having a 3-thread awakening. I'm in the braiding process and they're doing something else, right? So maybe it can help with facilitating communication between people. But the other reason I think it's useful to talk about the end of the threads is because there are some implications that come from the ends of the threads that I think actually are good to be aware of beforehand. So I want to share with you what I think the implications of the threads, the end of the threads, are for wherever you're at in the process. So the first one, I've already said this a bunch of times. I said I would repeat it multiple times. The first one is clearly, if at the end you're going to let go of ontologies, you're going to let go of frameworks, you're going to let go of the threads ultimately anyway, then why get hung up on them now? Right? If the model's right and you're eventually going to let these things go, then you might as well not attach to them so strongly now. And so my advice would be to not get hung up on any particular map or tradition or teacher or practice or system of practices or system of beliefs or really any kind of notion of awakening whatsoever, including this model. The looser you hold it, right, the easier the ultimate releasing will be. If ultimately you're going to release all these things, there's no reason to hold this one. The second one is to not get hung up on any particular experience. So there's a lot of focus on spiritual experiences, what you're experiencing, really prioritizing the depth of this emptiness experience you had, or the feeling of the oneness experience that you had, or so forth. And you can really build those up into real, like, things that you feel like you need to repeat or feel like they're very important in some kind of ultimate sense. And if in the end you're going to cease to be able to and no longer be interested in any kind of spiritual experiences whatsoever, if that's the trajectory ultimately, then do yourself a favor and don't get totally hung up on any particular experience that happens along the way, right? If eventually you're going to let go of all of them, it doesn't make sense to cling to them along the way. Same with identities, right? I am awareness. Hold that really lightly because you're eventually going to let go of that. There's no reason to cling to that so strongly right now. The same with ontological frameworks. The whole universe is one thing. That's an ontological assertion. The whole universe is empty. There are no others. Nothing's real. Everything's just energy, right? These are ontological frameworks. You're going to let go of all of those. Then why invest energy and why get hung up on this as you're moving through the threads? And so I wanted to share with you this tool that I think is really helpful. Like I said, my background's from Buddhism, and I came into this through Buddhism. And there's a tool within Buddhism that's called the Tetralemma that I think is really a very useful kind of like tool for identifying where you're hung up on something, all of the previous things, practices and teachers and experiences and ontologies and so forth. There's a great way, I think, for you to check yourself with using the Buddhist Tetralemma. So the Tetralemma is a four-part inquiry where you affirm, negate, and then assert both, and then neither. And then you can say there's a fifth part where you just forget it or let it go. And so I'll give you an example. Let's say you have acquired and you're holding on to a belief that, or a vantage point, or an ontology that everything is awareness, everything is consciousness, let's say. So you would apply the Buddhist Tetralemma to that. You would say, okay, am I affirming the position? Everything is awareness. That's an affirmative position. Everything's awareness. Am I negating the position? Nothing is awareness. There's no such thing as awareness. Am I holding both? There's both awareness and there's emptiness or non-awareness, right? That would be a both. And then a neither would be some other position that says there's the awareness or non-awareness. Neither one of those are right. And so you apply the Tetralemma as you check to see, are you gripping to one of these four positions? When it comes to awareness, are you gripping to awareness? Everything is awareness. Are you gripping to nothing's awareness, or there's no such thing as awareness? Are you gripping to both? Are you gripping to neither? Like which one are you holding on to? Which one of these four things are you holding on to? And then you see it and you're like, oh, okay, I'm stuck on the affirmation. Let me let it go. Okay, having said all that, I'm going to finish with two things that if you are going to get stuck on anything, if you are going to have an ontology, a position, if you are going to adopt, if you need to adopt like an affirmation of some kind, if you need to like hold on to something, because what I'm saying is too loose and unstructured and you want to just hold on to something, I'm going to give you two things to hold on to focus on. So the first one is, I would say, work on uncovering and processing and welcoming the unconscious conditioning, the psyche thread. Work on the psyche thread instead of cultivating states or experiences, particularly non-dual experiences, emptiness experiences, and so forth. I would redirect my attention. If you think you have agency, if you think it's important to have a plan for what your spiritual path looks like, my vote would be to focus on the psyche thread. And I would say to continuously try through your behavior, through your thoughts, through specific kinds of cultivation practices, through interactions with other people, through all sorts of other ways, I would advise trying to bake in as much kindness and compassion as you possibly can into the autopilot, like into the way that you function. And I'm saying both of those things because ultimately when you let go of all of the threads, as I've said a couple of times, what you'll be left with is just your conditioning running on autopilot, right? And no guardrails, no ways of monitoring or separating from the conditioning. And so I think if you work on that unconscious material and really drill kindness and compassion into your autopilot, then for me, that would be the thing I would say would be the most important practice to be focused on throughout the whole process of weaving these threads together. All right. So I wanted to give you two little last little things, sources of information for if you want to read something about what we've just been talking about. And I'm presenting two things here, depending on where you're at. And if you're like at the beginning end of opening threads, just starting to open threads, you want to learn how to open threads, you want to learn how to start having non-dual experiences or start having experiences of unity or start like opening up the energy threads, I would point you towards a book that I've just written for people who are just starting out, who want to open these threads. If, on the other hand, you are like deeper into the process, I've written up this model on a new website called multidharma.net, where I go through all of the threads. I go through and I write about the process of braiding and integrating and releasing, like I've been talking about today. So either one, I know not everybody's like super into reading about this stuff, but if you are a reader and you want something to sink your teeth into a little bit, I would recommend both of those things to you. And yeah, please just remember it's a model, a map, not the territory.